Welcome to Dear Social Worker, Let's Talk, the podcast that prioritizes you, the person behind the title. I'm your host, Lisa Rann Edwards, and I'm here to help you become an emotionally intelligent social work leader and promote your well-being with socialworkcoachinghub.com. Welcome to another episode raising awareness of Black History Month here in the UK. And today I have the creme de la creme of diversity, equality and inclusion, Lisa Zaranyika, Head of Diversity for Frontline Charity. Today's podcast is titled, What is Anti-Racist Practice in Social Work? So let's talk. Welcome, Lisa, to the Dear Social Worker podcast.
Oh, Lisa Rann, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. What an introduction. I don't think I've ever been called creme de la creme before, but that's great. And really, really pleased to be here celebrating Black History Month with you.
Thank you so much for being here, Lisa. I am super excited about our conversation, especially as we touch base. We managed to see each other earlier this week, and we were talking about defining anti-racist practice. And I was sharing with you, with my experience of being a social worker, the term anti-racist was never raised. Training around anti-racism was never offered. So I think it's key that we look at how can we define the term anti-racist and what does that mean in social work?
And I hear you in terms of the lack of training that there has been previously. I think anti-racism in social work isn't a new concept necessarily. I think it's definitely been one, though, that has had peaks and troughs in terms of how proactively it's been included within the training. And I think the murder of George Floyd back in 2020 definitely put it back kind of at the forefront of people's minds in terms of the experiences of race and racism, and definitely kind of helped us as a social work profession to reconnect with what is kind of an inherent part of our social work values. So, you know, in terms of anti-racism, the BASWA Code of Ethics talks about social workers needing to demonstrate a clear commitment to anti-oppressive practice and proactive anti-racism. And similarly, you know, it's integral. The Social Work England Professional Standards talks about the need to promote social justice. So it is core to who we are as social workers. But you're absolutely right in terms of anti-racism often gets said, but rarely defined. And I think it's really important that we do seek to define it. And anti-racism talks really about like the active dismantling of systems of privilege and everyday practices. And that's really important that we think about that in terms of an active dismantling of systems and structures of racism.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Lisa. Of course, it is part of our code of ethics. What I'm referring to is those conversations being opened up in the spaces in which I've worked, whether it's the one-to-one with my manager for supervision or whether it's team meetings, etc. The term often is anti-oppressive or anti-discriminatory practice, but never anti-racist.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I wonder whether that speaks to the discomfort that comes from many people when we start to have conversations about race. People, for many different reasons, feel uncomfortable at having conversations about race, particularly when it is about how that features in our interpersonal relationships with each other. And I think there's a lack of confidence and a lack of literacy really in relation to what does racism mean? How does racism show up? How prevalent it is in a profession that is committed to anti-oppressive and anti-discriminatory practice. And yet we see examples of racism every day. So I think that is part of the issue, is that when we don't want to talk about race or racism, how can we talk about anti-racism?
Absolutely. And what came to mind as you spoke there, I guess the catalyst, as you referred to earlier, around the term, more so around anti-racism, was the death of George Floyd. And that
Yeah.
propelled a lot of professional organisations, not just in social work, to look at what was termed then, anti-discriminatory and anti-oppressive practice, but they were taking on the challenge, as you referred to earlier, of using the term race, using the term anti-racism. And that certainly has propelled our voice in professional spaces. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think it's important for us to think about the history of that term anti-racism, because anti-racism and anti-racist practice was in social work in the 1970s and early 1980s, where there was real activism around the need for us to take an anti-racist approach, and that really kind of drove lots of initiatives around the importance of placing Black children with Black foster carers, for example. Lots
Mm,
of social work activism in the 1980s spoke about anti-racism, and then things moved on, and I think there was almost this um, kickback against what felt like a bit of a hierarchy of oppression, and the focus on anti-racism was interpreted as meaning that other aspects of marginalisation, for example, around sexual orientation or around disability, that those aspects of oppression weren't recognised or given equal weighting. And I think in order to address that, the social work profession then coined the term anti-discrimination and anti-oppression, or spoke more broadly about anti oppressive practice, which is
mm,
absolutely right. But I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. So it's really good to see our profession move to a place where we're able to speak about all of those things. So we're able to think
mm,
about anti-oppressive practice more broadly, but that we really hold ourselves to account to zoom in on specific sites of oppression, such as
mm,
racism, such as ableism, such as homophobia, that we don't shy away from those conversations. So, yeah, you're absolutely right that the murder of George Floyd gave us permission, gave us voice, let
mm.
us say it's still here, it's still an issue, we're still experiencing this, and we have to talk about it.
Absolutely. And the level of comfortability and confidence in speaking about it, even those that are considering, well, how have I contributed? I see a lot of posts on social media where we have white counterparts saying, I just did not know that this was the underbelly of racism, that these were the feelings that Black people were having in the workplace and beyond. And I was sharing with Lisa just before we started recording. As you know, I always have powwows with my guests before we record. But one of the stories is I was running a group coaching session for Frontline, and there was a lady there who raised some issues about race and how she was feeling about being Black in the workplace. And that opened up a space where white and Asian counterparts were more informed about those experiences. My question to you, Lisa, is linked around the training that you offer. How important is it that Black professionals have a space where they can share those experiences?
I think it's absolutely crucial. I think it's something that we do on the Frontline program, where we offer community spaces, and we offer community spaces to our participants who are from racialized minority backgrounds,
Mm,
really in recognition of the importance of having that space in which you're able to voice your experience, that you're able to feel validated and to feel heard, and that you're able to tell your story from a place of understanding. So I think what often happens when we talk about our pain, when we talk about our experiences, is that we have to almost give the backstory. We
mm,
almost have to set the context. We have to explain. We have to set it up before we can even get to the place where we say, and this is what happened and why it hurt so much.
mm,
Um, And I think when you're in a space with peers who just live that, who walk that walk,
Mm.
you tell your story and people get it straight away. There is such a comfort in that,
Yeah.
and such a validation in that. I think it's absolutely crucial.
Mm. Mm. Thanks for sharing that, Lisa. And as you were speaking, what came up for me is how I became a leadership coach with Frontline
Mm,
was following the murder of George Floyd. Frontline recognised that their coaching pool needed to be more diverse. And as a result of that, they put out a call for Black and Asian and ethnic groups who are coaches, qualified coaches, to come forward and apply. And I applied and I got the job. Now, if it wasn't for that, fast forward to the group coaching that I referred to
mm,
earlier, would that particular social work leader have a space to talk about the feeling she was having about being Black in the workplace?
yeah, yeah. And Lisa, and you speak to a really, really crucial point, right? Which is there is so much that we as Black social workers can do, but we need the recognition
Mm.
of the systems around us. We need the recognition of those who hold power that change needs to happen,
Yeah.
because we cannot do it alone, and we should not do it alone. And a colleague of mine often says that we didn't create these systems, so
Mm.
it shouldn't be our responsibility to fix it. And I think, I'm a bit, I have a slightly different perspective in terms of, I sometimes think, if not us, who?
Mm.
Um, but I absolutely hear that, like, it requires the people who have the power, who have the responsibility, who have the privilege to act, to open those doors for us to be able to create the much needed healing spaces, but also to make the progress that we need to make.
Mm. Representation matters, right?
100% representation matters, and I think it's not just it's not just the face. I think that representation needs to come with the belief and the values and the drives that empower and give voice in a meaningful way, as you did in that session.
I mean, you speak to something that we've talked about several times, but I'm going to mention it again. There's a difference between ethnicity and culture. And often some people think, and we as a race can be guilty of it too. I can share a story about that. Just seeing another person who looks like you doesn't necessarily mean their experiences as a Black professional are similar or the same.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think somebody said to me, I think I was in a lecture once, and somebody said, if you see somebody and you see that they're Black or that they're white, that's all that you know about them. Like,
Mm.
we make so many assumptions about what we know about somebody
Mm.
based on the way in which they're racialized.
Mm. Mm. I remember when I was a senior prac some many moons ago, shall we say, and we had a new ASYE worker, and God bless her soul, she passed away a couple of years ago from cancer, but I was her mentor at the time. And she was allocated a Black family. I think it was a Black Caribbean family. And this worker was Black Bayesian. She identified as Bayesian, right? So, again, for those of you listening across the world, there is a difference between ethnicity and culture, because Black Caribbean is a different culture to Black Bayesian, right? So, this social worker approached me after doing her initial visit and said that he was very unhappy with her, and let her know about that. And part of the reason why the parent responded that way is because the worker became too familiar or over familiar with this parent on the assumption that they had a similar culture. What are your thoughts around the differences between ethnicity and culture, Lisa, and how important is it to be aware of those differences.
I guess just go back a little bit and go back to when you asked about that question about the definition of anti-racism, and
Mm,
thinking about, so you talked about ethnicity and culture, and there's a step forward for that about race, and thinking
mhm,
about when we talk about race, what do we mean? And I think the
mm,
most important thing is to acknowledge that race is, well, this is my view, that race is a social construct, that race doesn't exist as a biological concept, so that it's constructed. So where we see racism, or
mm,
whenever we see race, that's where racism functions. And
mhm,
ethnicity talks, I suppose, much more about um, the quality of belonging to a population or a group.
mhm,
And then the culture really speaks, doesn't it, to
mm.
um, kind of the things that you have in common, that you celebrate, that make up like the history, the language, the
Right.
food, the
Yeah.
different aspects. So I think there is a real risk of thinking that because you might be racialized in a similar way to somebody else, or
Mm,
even that you have the same ethnic background, that you have the same culture, and that can lead to an over familiarity. And I think that's a real challenge for Black social workers,
mm,
because as social work practitioners, what we want to do is we want to connect with families.
mm,
Like, we know how important relationships are,
mm.
and how they're the foundation of really good social work practice. So we often want to find points that will connect us to families.
Yeah.
And when you see a family that you're working with that is racialized in the same way as you,
Mhm,
it's easy to think, oh, that is the point at which we can connect. But
mm.
as you rightly say, that can be a source of misstep if we think that because you're racialized in the same way, that everything else then is um, is going to be the same.
I think it's worth, on that point, I guess, giving some thoughts or some tips for social workers who have overstepped the mark or about to be, allocated a particular family um, through the racialized, in quotes, lens.
Mm-hmm.
What would what support or what tips would you offer there, Lisa, around managing A, emotions around that, and B, the practicality of that, having those conversations with managers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think it's always a conversation to be had in terms of management. When if a manager was to say to a social worker, "I'm allocating this family to you because I think it's really important that they have a social worker from the same racial background." I'm not saying that that's not the case. That sometimes that can be really helpful and important. And back to your point earlier, representation matters. There is
Mm,
definitely something to be said that for a family, they can be put at ease by
mm,
somebody who walks into their home and looks like them, and they might feel that, okay, at least this is somebody that they could feel that this is somebody that they connect with. Um, but I think that's a presumption that shouldn't be made by the social worker or the manager, and a conversation around, when you say you're allocating this family to me because you think I'll be able to connect on the basis of our shared racial identity, what does that mean? What did you have in mind?
mm,
I think that's an important question to ask. It's back to that challenge.
mm.
Um, but I think in terms of like the practical tips for working with families, I think it's absolutely holding that in mind. Absolutely holding in mind that racial identity doesn't give you a an automatic pass to building a relationship.
I remember that happened to me. I do have a story to share. I'll share later, but there was a basically the family was saying that you or me as a black worker was working for, in quotes, the system,
Mm,
and the system in their eyes is not run by us. So
yeah,
therefore, I'm the enemy, or
yeah,
the black worker is the enemy. So to your point that you're saying there, it's so true. Those questions do need to be asked, because for some black workers, I've certainly been in spaces where it absolutely gets you in trouble with the family being sent there. Like, why have they sent you? Have they sent you just because you're
yeah,
black? It makes no sense. I don't want to work with you.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
happens.
And I think one of the things that we talk about in our teaching at Frontline is about a, an approach that's informed by cultural humility. So
Mm,
really thinking about being humble, going into those spaces, seeking to understand, seeking to know, not making assumptions about what you think you know
mm,
about a family's culture or background, whether that's shared or different. And I think that's a really helpful framework when working with families.
mm,
Asking the questions, seeking to understand, sharing maybe a little bit aspects of self, but also being curious about
mm,
what that family's experience is. And I think I guess the flip side to that, Lisa, and I would say is that sometimes it does feel like it gives you a pass for families as well. So I
mm,
think, I've had definitely in practice times when I've walked into a family's home and the relief is palpable.
mm,
Um, and then there's an aspect of you start to then question the professionalism. You're like, am I being over familiar?
mm,
The family members like my I've had experiences where a parent has said, "Oh, auntie's here. Look, come and say hello to
mm.
auntie." And I'm doing this thing where I'm like, "Oh, how do I make it clear what my role is? Am I being over familiar? Am I being unprofessional?" So there are so many there are so many minefields, aren't there, in terms of that experience of working with families who look the same and have similar, or we might think might have similar experiences.
That's right. That's right. And it's interesting when you mention the term auntie. It's a such a familiar term of respect
Yes.
within our culture.
Yeah.
And your automatic response to that on a cultural level is to respond to that. Oh, this child is being, respectful. But
Yes.
when you're working, is that stepping into over familiarity by responding, or is it the correct thing to do to redirect that familiar phrase?
Yes. Yeah. And it's there's so many, and this is, I suppose it's back to that point around having spaces with people who know and understand and have a shared experience that you can unpick that with,
Mm,
because there are so many things going on in your mind in that instance. So I know for me, the question was, if I say to this parent, no, 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 I'm not auntie,
mm,
I'm the social worker. Like,
mm,
I've walked into your home,
mhm,
into your space, and the choice of language that you've used to describe me to your child, I'm undermining.
mhm.
Um, like that's, thinking about how do I do that in a way that feels respectful, thinking
Yes.
about, you know, actually, is it important that I'm really clear with this child who I am, what my role is?
Mm,
Am I aligning myself with the parent if I allow them to call me auntie, and
mm,
therefore I'm not able to build an independent relationship with the child? There are
mm,
so many questions that come up, but
mhm.
I think if you don't have a space with people that you're able to unpick that and make sense of that, yeah, it can be really, really complex, and you start off that piece of work on the wrong foot and really feeling kind of unclear or uncertain about the direction of the work that you're doing.
Mhm, mhm. I love that. Being curious, always, creating
Always.
boundaries, always, and not assuming, not presuming anything.
Yes. Yes.
Those are, screaming loud and clear from what you're saying that this is the way forward. And I know I'm going to give a quick shout out to our listeners in Australia and our listeners in Japan and in Germany and Ireland. I see you all. And I'm really glad that you're listening to this episode and listening to what we're saying, because I guess what we could pull in here, Lisa, is if someone does not identify as Black and as being as part of Black History Month, how can they be informed about this knowledge that we're talking about today, but how can they use this knowledge to support their Black colleagues?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Black History Month is not is not just a celebration of Black history for people who identify as Black. I think it's really important that we understand. I mean, I have a colleague who says, and rightly so, Black history isn't just for October. Like
Yeah.
1 month cannot hold our history. So it's absolutely thinking about how do you take the opportunities when Black history is promoted in Black History Month to inform yourself, but to make sure that that's taken throughout the rest of the year. Because the real aim is that we're aware that Black history is history, that is part of the everyday um, history, learning, understanding, experience of people from racialized minority backgrounds. And what is learnt in that space is taken beyond the month of October, that it informs how people interact with their racialized minority
Mm,
colleagues, children and families that they work with,
mm,
professionals in their networks, how they use that understanding to change the way in which they see. And I think
mm,
back to your point about the colleague in that coaching space
mm,
who it was enlightening hadn't been aware that these are the experiences, these are the day-to-day lived experiences. I think once you're aware, once you are conscious that these are the battles and challenges that they face, that it's incumbent on you to think about what do I do next.
mm.
So Maya Angelou says, there's that quote around, once you know better, do better.
Oh, yes. Yes. Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. This has been such an enlightening conversation, and we are due to close shortly. But we always save the best part till last. There's just two more things really. I want to just reiterate the point that you made about Black History Month. I come across a lot of people who identify as Black who say, I don't bother with Black History Month. I don't think it's worth it. It's something that's just been created, etc., etc. Can't fit our history into 1 month. And the list goes on of why they feel they don't want to be part of it. I have a different view. One, I agree that a month is just not enough. It should be all year round. We all know this. But for me, I believe that October is at least a period of time where the eyes are on Black history and there is an awareness that continues to grow year on year on year. And I think we need to maximize that awareness, and that through that maximization, we then carry that through for the rest of the year. I know you mentioned it was your colleague that had that thought, but what are your thoughts around Black History Month as a whole?
Yeah, I think I think I'm inclined to agree that it's contentious. I think the
Yes.
idea again that 1 month cannot hold our history, like the rich history that we have, um, the idea that it's confined in 1 month and then what the rest of the 11 months of the year we go back to other histories. I think that that's definitely problematic and it needs to be acknowledged and it's about the learning that we take from Black History Month and making sure that we celebrate that and we take it forward through the rest of the year.
Mm,
So as you were speaking there, I was thinking about birthdays, and I
mm,
was thinking about the fact that you could celebrate life and give thanks to life
mm,
every single day that you're alive, every single day of the year that you're alive. And it's okay to have a day that you celebrate and promote and you dedicate to giving thanks to that. It's up to you then beyond that what you do, whether you choose to then celebrate it beyond. And I guess that's it with Black History Month. There
mm,
is this 1 month that we have that spotlight, and I say we take the spotlight and we light the torch, and then we run through the rest of the year saying this torch is not going out. We're going
mhm,
to hold this torch
mhm.
right the way through from October to November to December and beyond,
Yes,
because 1 month cannot hold our history.
yes. And factually, that is spot on.
Yeah,
Factually, it just cannot.
yeah,
Um, I think the two more points I'm going to make. I keep saying that, but I just
yeah.
we could talk for ages, couldn't we, Lisa? But um, one thing that came to mind as you was talking is there's a sense of personal responsibility, isn't there, to keep Black history alive and awareness of what is happening within our community. And I think that efforts have been made in relation to that. For example, here in the UK, we have what we call Black Pound Day, which is the first Saturday of every month. And that's not taking the conversation to, the economics of the Black community. However, that is one thing that keeps the voice alive.
Yes. Are you saying, Lisa Ann, in terms of how do we, like, what are the mechanisms in which we ensure that our visibility, our history, our struggle, our joy is carried on throughout?
Yes, I was referring to your point there that you were making, that as we celebrate birthdays, etc. And what came to me when you spoke was there's a sense of personal responsibility to keep our voice alive, as well as a collective responsibility to do so. And
Yeah.
I was just sharing the example that someone has taken the initiative to introduce something called Black Pound Day here in the UK, and opened up a Black Pound shop and different things that are happening within the Black community here in the UK, which is the attempt, to your point, of keeping it alive throughout the year and not just October.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, and we spoke about it earlier, didn't we, in terms of it's always that, I think, that challenge, that conflict in terms of whose responsibility is it. And I think
Mm.
that sense sometimes it's exhausting, right? We talk about
Mm.
that burden that gets placed on the individual who experiences
Mm.
the oppression or discrimination, to always be the one to fight.
Yeah.
um, and that at times that does feel draining, and at times that feels exhausting, and
Mm.
at times it's okay to take a rest and a break from that. But
Mm.
I think it's when, when you feel that energy, when you feel charged to absolutely, as you say, take that collective responsibility or individual responsibility to do something with it, um, and to make a difference within our communities, within our families, within
Mm.
our interpersonal relationships, but also to give ourselves permission when it becomes tiring, when it becomes burdensome, to rest and
Mm.
take a break.
That feels like a really natural place to end our conversation there. The last thing I always ask my guests to do, and I know I said I was going to share a story, I will do that on social media, on LinkedIn. You can follow me there, Lisa Ann Edwards. You can follow me on Instagram at Dear Social Worker Podcast. I'm on TikTok, Social Work Coaching Hub, and YouTube, Social Work Coaching Hub. I will share all of my stories and my experiences as a Black professional in social work, and quite an emotive story, really, about how I was given a family where there was lots of racism. But one thing I always ask my guests to do is to write a letter to the listeners, and starting the letter with "Dear Social Worker." But because, Lisa, you are with us, and I'm so excited I've been able to speak to you about this, I would love for you to start your letter. It doesn't have to be long, it could be just a few words, but just as a letter of encouragement and empowerment. But starting it with "Dear Social Worker who identifies as Black," and then just to offer some support and encouragement for them. Over to you.
Okay. So, dear social worker who identifies as Black, I see you, I hear you, you matter. There are going to be days where it feels really, really difficult, and there are going to be days where you are filled with joy. Social work is one of the most challenging and rewarding jobs that there is. I think take the nuggets of the joy and the celebration, and know that you are not alone, and there are people who are available to support you and champion you on your journey. You're doing a great job. Keep going.
You've been listening to Dear Social Worker Let's Talk podcast, and next week we'll be talking about working with Black families. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure being here.
Thank you.